Maxwell.
Thank you very much. Firstly, thank you very much for inviting us here today, and thank you to both of you for the initiative to organise this workshop, because it really is very, very important, and it somehow feels a lot more comforting to think that there are other people who are jumping on the same drum that we've been banging for a while now, so it's excellent. Pieter in a moment is going to go through our PowerPoint presentation. I suppose what I want to say before he does that, which leads quite nicely into it, is probably harsh words, but I think they need to be said. Before we start looking at enforcement, before we start looking at wildlife crime and the syndicates and everything that goes on with that, I think we have to look at ourselves. I think we have to look at ourselves as CITES and as the European Wildlife Trade Regulation, and at us as NGOs, and what we do and what we've done and what we continue to do. And I think a lot of what we're doing is allowing that illegal wildlife trade to flourish. They are making a mockery of us, and they're taking advantage of the fact that we're just not looking at what we're doing. We're very good at writing down our plans, and we're very good at making some kind of decision in a CITES conference or maybe in a wildlife trade regulation, and then we don't go back and look at that decision that we made to see if it was the right decision. So where I'm talking about is where we've got maybe archaic legislation in place, and Pieter will talk about that, and I'm referring here to the personal and household effects legislation, which was probably very useful in its day, but today it is a very effective loophole for poaching. I can then talk about the current legislation that we have in place, and we have very good legislation in place, both in the EU Wildlife Trade Regulation and in CITES, but who looks at it? I know we spend an awful lot of time on the CITES database, and Pieter's going to show you with all the slides how we're not looking at the trends and we're not looking at what the illegal wildlife is doing, and if we did look at it a bit more, we'd maybe have a clue as to where they're going, and we could be a bit further ahead of the game. And then I think the third thing, which is a difficult one, is I think we should look at past decisions that we've made collectively, both at CITES particularly, and with NGOs have joined in with that maybe were bad decisions. Maybe they weren't, but maybe they were bad decisions, and if they were bad decisions, we should admit to that. For example, we believe that having a legal sale of ivory has prompted and certainly inflamed the situation we have now with elephant ivory, and maybe we should be looking at decisions we've made in the past and learn from them, because if we get our own house in order, then we can start tackling this illegal wildlife crime which is rampant now and taking over. So on that note, I'm going to pass over to Pieter.
Good afternoon to you all, and thank you very much for coming. We've talked a lot about the illegal trade in wildlife, but what I'd like to talk about is something quite different, and that is how the legal trade, or the so-called legal trade, is actually a good stimulus and is being used as a cover for the illegal wildlife trade. On this graph here, and I wish I could see it and point things out to you, but if we start looking at the left there, we see the number of elephant hunting trophies that are exported per year, and I've only chosen 4 countries there. One of the things that you can see is that there's quite a lot of difference in terms of the numbers of elephant trophies that are being exported. Zimbabwe is way up in the top. And you will see why I'm focusing on Zimbabwe in a second. But the second, and you know, this is all from the official CITES database. The second, the yellow line, which is South Africa, is actually quite surprising, because those of you who know South Africa and have been to South Africa know that there's hardly any elephants outside the national parks. So meaning that South Africa is exporting, you can see in some places it comes up to 250 elephant trophies are being exported from South Africa per year, but South Africa doesn't have wild elephants that are available for the trophy hunting trade. So how does that work? The other thing that I want you to look at is where these trophy tusks are going. Okay? If we look at the graph down at the bottom right there, what we see is that, for example, Spain has always been very interested in trophy hunting of elephants. Even their king did it. And the other thing is that, but Spain shows a pretty consistent pattern over 2005 to 2011. And so does Germany. It's stayed at a relatively low level. But if you look at, for example, a country like Denmark, what you see there is that all of a sudden, in 2009, there were 120 trophy hunters from Denmark, a small country, who went largely to Zimbabwe to hunt elephants. I don't think that's possible. I don't think that all of a sudden the Danes decided that they were all going to be trophy hunters, and that they were all going to go to Zimbabwe, and that they were all going to come home with trophy tusks. Okay? And you see it's fallen down again. 2011 is very low. But just to give you an example that is not from Europe, look at what's happening in Qatar. Same pattern. Almost nothing or very little. All of a sudden in 2010, you have over 185 trophy hunters supposedly from Qatar, coming to Zimbabwe and taking tusks. Now, the next thing I would like to point out to you is that trophies are exempted under the personal and household effects derogations, but what CITES is also doing, and again, most of this comes from Zimbabwe, what CITES is also doing is allowing the export of kilos of elephant tusks. Now, this is all on the official CITES database. It's not hidden anywhere. You don't have to, go like Interpol, you don't have to sneak around in the shadows to find out this kind of information. It's all right there. Now, how in the world is it allowed to be able to import, for example, if we look at Portugal and to Germany, almost 200 elephant tusks, kilos of elephant tusks. How does that work? How is that legal within the CITES guidelines? It's very strange. You will also see that Qatar comes up again, that's sort of that pinkish line down there. And you will also see that big peak again in what's happening with Denmark. Now, what this sort of seems to correlate with is that, remember that in 2008, CITES released some ivory to China and to Japan. Supposedly, those were the only countries that were allowed to receive raw ivory, but some of it seems to have been leaking out to various other places. Now let's turn to rhinos. What we see here is, again, you see, what we do when we look at these official CITES database numbers is that we're looking for trends. And some of these trends are very, very interesting. You can see, and we know, for example, that if we look again at Denmark, which is that gray line down at the bottom, we see that it's going along, and then there's a couple of spikes, especially in 2010, and then it drops down again. Now, supposedly, in 2010, lots and lots of Danes went to South Africa to trophy hunt rhinos. Again, if you look at the Czech Republic, you can also see that it's been going on for quite some time, but, in very low numbers. And then suddenly in 2011, you have 30 trophy hunters going to South Africa to hunt rhinos. One thing that I would like you to notice is that while there are some fluctuations before, look at what's happening in 2011 for almost all those countries that are listed. You can see that upward trend, and especially if you look at a place like Thailand. Thailand is not known for trophy hunters. But there they are. They're all going to South Africa, and they shot something like 42 rhinos that were exported as trophies to Thailand. The next thing I want to come to, I'm actually missing a slide here. What I wanted to show you was a slide that looked at the number of permit applications to South Africa from various different countries. These are the permit applications to hunt rhinos in South Africa. In 2009, 2010, 2011, it was dominated to a very large extent by Vietnamese. Almost 70% of all the trophy applications that went to South Africa came from Vietnam. Now, as we all know, these hunters who came from Vietnam were what we call pseudo trophy hunters, because they weren't interested in trophy hunting. They were interested in paying a little bit of money, or a reasonable amount of money, to go and shoot a rhino, and then take that horn back to Vietnam, and then use it. Now, that is against CITES rules. You're not allowed, as a trophy hunter, to bring in a personal and household effect, which is, in this case, the rhino horn, and then to use it in any kind of commercial way. This is exactly what was going on in Vietnam. In fact, CITES requested the Vietnamese authorities to go around and see where all these horns were that were coming into the country. So what the authorities did is they visited, in an amazing effort, visited 40 former hunters. 40, okay? We're talking about 70 or 80 or 90 per year that are going into Vietnam. So anyway, they decided to go and visit 40 households of hunters to see where these horns were, because they were not allowed to sell them. 11 of the people that they were going to interview as to where their horns were not home. So they never went back again to find out what happened to the horns. In only 12.5% of the cases did they actually find the horn, and intact. On all the other cases, so 83 or 80, whatever it is, what happened to that horn was that they said they had lost it, they said it was stolen, they said they had given it to relatives, they said they had cut it up into small pieces. You know, in other words, it was being used commercially. So that's where the pseudo trophy hunting comes in. And if we can go back to this slide here, you can see on the right-hand side there that this pseudo-trophy hunting is now going on in a lot of other countries. The reason is that in 2012, South Africa said that they would no longer entertain any application from a Vietnamese national to come in to South Africa and shoot rhinos. So what happened was you have a tremendous upsurge in other countries, and these were all proxy hunters. In other words, Danes, Czechs, people from Poland, people from Russia were now applying to go to South Africa to shoot the rhinos, and I will bet you that if you go and visit these hunters, they will not have the horns anymore, because the horns will have gone to Vietnam. These were proxy hunters who also helped the horns reach Vietnam. Now, if we look at, I just want to go quickly through this. Lions are a relatively big export from South Africa as well. You can see in the yellow line there that sometimes it comes close to 1,000 trophies, 1,000 lions, male lions, being shot per year in South Africa. But what is interesting is this recent surge in the trade in bones and in skeletons, in the red and in the purple. And where is all this going? It's all going to Laos. As you can see, bones per kilo, 250 in 2009, and you can see again the rise in the trend in all these categories. These are bones times 10, so it's 1,500 bones or more in the yellow that are going to Laos. What this is doing, what this legal trade is doing, in my opinion, is that it's stimulating the illegal trade, because this creates a supply for a very large demand for bones, which are used in various tonics and traditional Chinese medicine products in Laos. And what's happening is that these lion bones are now being used as a substitute for tiger bones, because they don't have any tigers anymore. So you have to find another animal that looks like a tiger. So there we go. We now start hunting these lions. So again, this stimulates the trade. So just to sum up now, the loopholes are this personal and household effects derogation, where you as a hunter can go out and you can hunt, bring back a trophy, and the trophy doesn't even enter into the trade statistics of CITES. In other words, what happens is that hunting trophies are not considered trade, so therefore CITES will not uplist lions to Appendix 1, for example, because they say the trophy hunting is not trade, so the lion offtake doesn't count. There are very lax EU controls over imports and re-exports. A lot of this rhino horn that's coming into Czech Republic and into Poland and into Denmark, strangely enough, is probably all gone now. It's certainly not with the hunters anymore. There are very lax CITES authorities in the source countries. Remember that all these kilos of tusks that were being imported into various countries, it was done because somebody in the country itself was sitting there with a rubber stamp and said, approved, off the go. Okay? There's a very strong weakness in the CITES permit system, especially for Appendix 2 species. There are, in most cases, Appendix 2 species only need export permits. They don't need individual import permits from the country that it's being brought to. And as I said in the beginning, the grey trade really stimulates the illegal trade by creating a semi-legal supply. And in the cases of lion bones and things like that, it creates a demand or a supply that is creating a bigger demand, and you start getting into this circle, and before you know it, what's going to happen is that lions are going to be poached. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You went a little bit out of the scheduled time, but I think it was really